The air was thick, the humidity clinging to everything, wrapping itself around my body like a heavy blanket. Sweat beaded up, sticking to my shirt as if it was part of me. The old fan hanging above did little to cool the air, just swirling it around lazily in the living room. I was sprawled on the couch, trying to find some relief in the small shadows from the half-closed blinds. Asher, my younger brother, was raiding the freezer again, hoping to snag a popsicle he wasn't allowed to have until his birthday, which was still 3 days away, way too long for an almost 11-year-old. "Hey Nick, can I have one of the popsicles?" he asked, his voice breaking through the quiet hum of the fan. "No, we have to wait until Wednesday," I called back without lifting my head from the cushion. "But it's my birthday soon. I should be able to have one," Asher whined, mixing that sense of entitlement and annoyance only little brothers can master. "Your birthday's not until Wednesday, dude. Plus Mom and Dad said no," I replied, raising my voice just enough to match his irritation. It was just the two of us until Sunday morning while our parents were away on a business trip. At 14, I was trusted enough to look after things, including Asher, though sometimes it felt more like a punishment than a sign of responsibility. Asher slammed the freezer shut and flopped down on the couch, the cushions sinking under his weight. "I'm bored," he groaned, his body melting into mine as he sprawled across the couch. "Yeah, okay, I don't care," I muttered, pushing him off. "I need some space, trying to catch some cool air." He got up, wandering over to the sliding glass door and staring out with that look he always got when he was thinking up his next scheme. "Can we go look for snakes outside?" he asked, hopeful. "You can. I'm tired," I replied, closing my eyes and imagining a few moments of peace, without the constant noise and chaos of Asher's plans. "You're always tired," he shot back, before a loud knock at the front door jolted us both upright. "Don't answer it," I mumbled, half into the couch. "Why not?" Asher asked. "Because it could be a serial killer wanting to make you his next victim," I said dryly, though the banging continued, louder this time. "This is the FBI. Open up. You're all under arrest." The muffled shout could only belong to one person, Jacob. "Fine, open it," I sighed, resigning myself to the interruption. Asher flung the door open and in barged Jacob, followed by Trevor, our closest friends and partners in crime. They looked like they'd run the whole way here, their faces red and sweat-streaked as they burst into the living room. "Nick, you won't believe what we found in the woods." Trevor's voice was full of excitement, his eyes wide. "We found an abandoned treehouse," Jacob added, catching his breath as the words tumbled out. That got my attention. Despite the heat, I sat up, curious. "Where?" I asked, my curiosity flickering. "It's past the quarry," Jacob explained, wiping the sweat from his brow. "About a 15-minute walk past it." "I want to go. Please, Nick, let's go check it out." Asher's voice was full of eager excitement, his earlier annoyance forgotten. I glanced at them, their faces full of anticipation, and then at the clock. It was 3:16 p.m. Nothing but time stretched ahead of us. With a reluctant shrug, I gave in. "All right, I guess," Trevor whooped. "All right, let's go, quick." They were out the door before I even stood up, their energy a stark contrast to my slow pace. But as I followed, the idea of an adventure, even a small one, began to cut through the heat. The ride there was tough, each pedal stroke stirring up hot air around me, a small relief from the heavy humidity. We cut through the back trails, the woods around us blurring into a mix of green and brown, a sharp contrast to the slow pace of our small town. My muscles ached with effort, but there was a certain freedom in pushing through, away from the stagnant air of home. Jacob and Trevor led the way, their laughter trailing behind them like a banner. Asher pedaled hard to keep up, his earlier sulkiness replaced by the excitement of the adventure ahead. I lagged behind, dreading the return trip in the harsher afternoon sun. When we reached the quarry, a large gap in the landscape, a drop into rocky nothingness, we paused. It always felt like the edge of the world, but today it was just a landmark on the way to something possibly better. "The treehouse isn't on the trail," Jacob said, wiping his brow and pointing to a thicker part of the woods. "It's a little off the path." I raised an eyebrow. "How'd you even find it?" "We were looking for spots to catch water snakes," Trevor said, hopping off his bike and heading toward the brush, his excitement contagious. The woods closed in around us, the air cooler now, thick with the scent of moss and decay. Sunlight broke through the trees in narrow beams, spotlighting the forest floor and creating a quiet, almost mystical atmosphere. After what felt like forever, dodging branches and stepping over roots, the trees finally parted to reveal a small clearing. And there, high in an old oak tree, stood the treehouse. It was weathered and worn, the wood bleached gray by the sun, almost blending with the tree itself. The craftsmanship was undeniable. This had been built with care, not just thrown together. "Dude, this is awesome," I said in awe, my voice filled with wonder as I stood, neck craned, staring up at it. "We haven't gone up yet," Trevor grinned. "I wanted to get you guys first." The ladder was simple, nailed directly to the tree, the rungs rough and inviting. It looked solid, but as I reached for the bark to steady myself, a strange feeling washed over me. The tree felt wrong, not quite right, like the hide of an animal rather than the rough surface of a tree. I pulled my hand back, trying to shake the feeling, but it lingered, a small whisper in the back of my mind. I glanced at Asher, who was already bouncing on his toes, eager to climb. "Quit being such a baby," I muttered, trying to push the uneasy feeling away. I knew he was just a kid, excited and oblivious to the strange pull of my instincts, but we were already here. Curiosity nudged us forward, and we climbed. We had come this far, and there was no turning back. With a deep breath, we braced ourselves for whatever was waiting inside the treehouse. The ladder groaned under my weight as I climbed higher, each step sending a shiver through the old wood. At the top, I hesitated, peering into the dim interior. The smell hit me first, a musty, earthy scent mixed with something sour. When I stepped inside, the silence was deafening. The treehouse was empty. No Asher, no sound of his laughter, no scraping of a knife against wood, just an eerie emptiness. "Asher," my voice echoed, foreign in the silence. I moved further in, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. On the floor was the knife we had brought, lying beside a pile of fresh wood shavings, but there was no sign of my brother. Panic gripped me as I called down to the others. "He's not here. I can't find him." Jacob's confused and fearful face appeared below. "What do you mean, he's not there?" I scrambled down, my mind racing with impossible thoughts. We regrouped at the base of the tree. "He has to be here," Jacob said, his voice desperate. "He can't just vanish." We split up, calling his name, the forest swallowing our voices. Time stretched, minutes becoming hours. The panic faded into something colder, deeper, as the fear settled in. We decided to return and get help, knowing we weren't equipped to deal with whatever had happened on our own. The walk back felt like a blur. The quarry passed unnoticed, the trees only a green blur. Fear lent our legs new strength, but as we neared the edge of town, reality began to set in. Asher was gone. My little brother had disappeared, and I was supposed to be the one watching over him. We left our bikes outside the local police station, the small building looking almost too normal to be the place where this strange story might be taken seriously. The officers listened skeptically as we stumbled through our story about the treehouse, the odd bark, and the disappearance. It sounded insane, even to me, but desperation colored our voices. A search party was quickly organized, and we led them back into the woods, retracing our steps with growing dread. The forest felt different now, more menacing, as if it knew we were looking for something it wasn't ready to give up. When we arrived at the clearing, my heart sank. The treehouse was gone, replaced by a hole in the ground, as if the earth had swallowed it whole. The officers exchanged confused and suspicious looks. Their eyes were on me, heavy with unspoken questions. The search continued, but as darkness fell, we found no sign of Asher, no trace of the treehouse, only the emptiness that had swallowed it all. By the time the sun rose again, everything had changed. The forest was just a forest again, the treehouse never to be found again. And Asher, he was still gone. For years, something has been following me. I swear I can hear them outside my tent at night. I started a solo 7-day hike, and it wasn't until the 3rd day that I realized something was wrong. I woke up and stepped out of my tent, only to find that my small camp had been completely torn apart. My gear was scattered everywhere, and the little fire pit I'd built was crushed, as if something large had stomped on it. But the most terrifying thing was the footprints. They were all over the place, circling my tent repeatedly before stopping right at the entrance and then heading off into the woods. I hadn't heard anything during the night and figured it was just some prank by other hikers. After collecting my gear, I headed back down the trail. This trail was remote and tough, even for experienced hikers, which made me wonder, why would skilled hikers mess with my camp? Most people take this kind of hiking seriously. Damaging someone's supplies could be deadly, especially when you're out there alone. That day, I hiked for hours, taking switchbacks and stopping occasionally to look behind me. The mountain felt empty. I even went so far as to erase some of my own tracks in the dirt, hoping to make it harder for anyone to follow me. When I stopped for the night, I packed all my belongings inside the tent, thinking no one could have followed me. Holding my flashlight, I lay in my sleeping bag, waiting for any odd sounds. Then I heard it. A twig snapped, a rustle in the bushes, a rock rolling across the ground. I froze in fear. My first instinct was to jump out of the tent and shine the light on whoever or whatever was out there, but something about the noises stopped me. These weren't the sounds of people. There were no lights or boots, just the shuffle of something large, maybe a bear or a wolf pack. The sounds grew closer, and I realized there must have been more than one creature circling my tent. They were pawing at the ground, breathing heavily and hoarsely, with a twisted, eerie laugh in the background. The noise sounded like yuk, yuk, as they circled, always staying just out of reach. I curled up in my sleeping bag, trying to protect myself as if hiding from monsters under my bed. This was no different. The noises grew frantic as they paced around faster. The laughter came from all sides. I tried covering my ears to block it out, but it didn't help. Then, just as quickly as it started, the noises faded away into the night. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to calm myself. I realized then how foolish I had been to hike alone on this mountain. People went missing here all the time, and I had always assumed it was because they were inexperienced. But now, I knew something far worse was out there. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the tent, too scared to leave, worried they were waiting outside. When the first light of morning touched my tent, I prayed, for the first time in years. Normally, I wasn't religious, but I couldn't help myself. I knelt and begged for a miracle, but there was no answer. I felt utterly alone. The camp was a mess. There were more strange footprints scattered everywhere. They were deep, indicating something heavy, much larger than a dog. As I traced my finger through one, I noticed the prints leading back down the mountain, the way I had come. I was already halfway through the hike, and it would take too long to go back. The summit was ahead, and if I could reach it, I could descend from the other side and make it to the parking lot where my truck was waiting. 3 more days, 2 nights. I could do it. I hiked hard all day, making good time. The mountain plateaued, and I paused for a moment to catch my breath, but I didn't stop long. Normally, I take a break at the top and enjoy the view, but not today. I had no time to waste. I could see my truck in the parking lot far below, but the way down was rocky and dangerous. By the time the sun was sinking low, I needed to find shelter. I spotted a clearing just off the trail, with tall trees behind it, offering some protection. I decided to set up camp there, next to a fallen tree with exposed roots. Sweat ran down my neck as I worked quickly, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The creatures only came at night, and I knew I had to hurry. Once the tent was set, I gathered firewood, using some emergency lighter fluid to start a large, crackling fire. It would burn for hours, offering me some safety. Then, a thought crossed my mind. I grabbed my flashlight and some gear and climbed into the trees, hoping to get a better vantage point. I found a secure spot high up and sat in silence, watching my tent from above. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking nearby. I waited, terrified, and then I heard it. A twig snapping, a rustling in the bushes. Something was getting closer, creeping toward my tent. I hugged the tree tightly, keeping hidden. My eyes stayed fixed on the campfire below, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was coming. The creatures were close now, moving around my camp, surrounding it. I watched them in the shadows, unable to count how many there were. One of them made the same eerie sound, yuk, yuk, and then the campfire scattered. Logs flew as if something had struck them with enormous force. I saw brown fur and a massive paw as one of them passed by. The creatures moved around the camp, sniffing the ground, and their guttural laughter echoed through the night. I could hear the sound of my tent being ripped apart and heavy breathing all around me. For hours, they searched the camp, repeating their movements, as though blind to everything except the smell and sound. Finally, just before dawn, they left, retreating back up the mountain. I hadn't slept at all and felt weak, my legs trembling as I climbed down from the tree. My ankle twisted painfully as I landed, but I didn't care. I had to get out. The camp was destroyed. My tent was in tatters, and blood stained the ground. Something had happened during the night, maybe a fight among the creatures. I dropped a piece of the torn tent and began my descent down the mountain. Gone were the lush trees and grassy slopes. Now I was back on the steep, rocky trail. I couldn't spend another night here. I had to keep moving. Below, I could see the parking lot and my old red truck, but it still felt so far away. I kept going, slower now, feeling the pain in my ankle with every step. Eventually, I found the rappel site, a place climbers had set up with ropes. I didn't hesitate, hooking myself up and beginning my descent. Halfway down, something tugged on the rope. It jerked, and I felt myself being pulled back up the mountain. I climbed faster, desperate to escape. I reached the bottom and dropped to the ground, my leg burning with pain, but I didn't care. I could see my truck in the distance, and I pushed myself to go faster. Then I heard the impossible. Rocks shifting behind me. Something heavy had landed. I dared not look back, but I ran faster. A small glade of trees appeared ahead, and I ducked into them, praying for cover. The sound of heavy breathing came closer, and I held my breath, praying it wouldn't find me. A laugh, deep and throaty, echoed in the trees. The creature was right beside me. I chanced a glance and saw its horrible face, a wolf-like creature with skin stretched tight, saliva dripping from its mouth. Its eyes were white, clouded, and blind. It sniffed the air, growling before moving on, leaving me in terror. Once it was gone, I limped away in the opposite direction, finally reaching my truck. I jumped inside, locking the doors behind me. I started the engine and, as the headlights flickered on, saw them. A dozen or so of the creatures crouched in front of my truck, their white eyes glowing. They screeched in pain as the headlights hit them, but I didn't hesitate. I slammed the gas pedal down, and the truck lurched forward. I could hear them chasing me, pounding down the road as I swerved to avoid them. My ankle throbbed, but I ignored the pain. The only thing that mattered was escaping. Finally, I reached the highway. Other cars were around, and I knew I was safe. I drove for hours, not stopping until I reached home. When I locked the door behind me, I felt relief. I poured myself a drink to calm my nerves, then collapsed into bed, exhausted. I fell asleep quickly, but in the middle of the night, I woke to a noise outside. Something was rubbing against my door. My heart froze. Then I heard the deep laugh, the same sound I had heard in the woods. It was back. The early morning chill bit at my skin as I pulled my jacket tighter, the sharp breeze sneaking in like it was testing my determination. This wasn't just another fishing trip. It was another chapter in a family tradition that felt as old as the hills surrounding our small town. My brother Lucas, along with our friends Ron, Jake, and Marty, gathered by the dock where our boat gently swayed, waiting for us to climb aboard. The sky was still a deep navy, dotted with stars that sparkled like the final sparks of a dying fire. The marina was cloaked in a solemn silence, broken only by the soft thud of gear being loaded and the distant call of an awakening seabird. I watched Lucas meticulously arrange the rods and tackle boxes, his movements careful and precise, perfected over years of fishing. "Grab the cooler, will you?" he called without looking up. I hefted it into the boat, the cans inside clinking together, a familiar sound that symbolized the start of our trips. Before long, Marty cracked open a drink, the sharp hiss cutting through the stillness. He flashed a grin. "Never too early, right?" I laughed, shaking my head. "If they made coffee in cans, that'd be you." We pushed off as the motor hummed steadily, breaking the smooth surface of the water. Behind us, the marina faded into the distance as the eastern sky began to blush with streaks of orange and pink, a promise of the day ahead. Ron and Jake were already swapping exaggerated tales from last year's outing, their laughter blending with the low rumble of the engine. Fishing wasn't just a hobby for us. It was a connection to something primal and enduring. My dad had introduced me to it when I could barely see over the edge of the boat, and I knew one day I'd pass it on to my own kids. "Heading to the usual spot?" Ron called out, his voice cutting through the crisp air. "Yeah," I nodded, glancing at Lucas, who was steering. The bay should be perfect today. The trip to the bay was its own kind of ritual. We passed familiar landmarks that marked our shared memories. The jagged silhouette of Eagle Cliff, the dip of the valley where we'd camped one summer, and the hidden beaches where we'd spent countless wild afternoons. As the sun rose higher, the world awakened around us. The water transformed from inky black to a brilliant blue, glinting under the morning light, while seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing our own excitement. Lucas guided the boat with a practiced hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He'd always been the careful one, his respect for the water deeper than ours. As the mist rising from the lake parted before us, I felt that familiar rush of freedom, a feeling that only came from being out here, surrounded by untamed nature. We anchored in the bay, its waters calm and inviting, bordered by dense woods that stood like silent sentinels. Stepping onto the deck, I grinned. "All right, boys, let's catch some memories." With that, we cast our lines, the day's adventure just beginning. The hours slipped by as the sun climbed, its warmth battling the cool breeze that skimmed the water. Each of us fell into a rhythm, casting, reeling and swapping stories. Marty had long since moved on to his second, or maybe third beer, his laughter loud and infectious. As the afternoon wore on, Ron's rod suddenly bent under the weight of a strong catch. "Here we go," he shouted, straining to reel it in. We gathered around, cheering him on. Moments like this were what made these trips special. It wasn't just about the fish, it was about the bond we shared, the collective triumph. When Ron finally hauled in a hefty pike, the mood shifted subtly. The light dimmed, though the sky was clear. A creeping fog began to roll in from the open water, thick and fast. "Ever seen it come in like this?" Jake asked uneasily. Lucas frowned, his eyes scanning the mist. "Not this quickly." His voice carried a quiet edge. The fog swallowed everything, reducing the world to a dense, white void. Jokes faded, replaced by a tense silence. Visibility dropped so low that even the shoreline disappeared. "We should try signaling," I suggested, trying to mask my unease. "Yeah, maybe higher ground will help," Ron agreed. We brought the boat closer to shore and secured it as best we could. The forest loomed ahead, its trees ghostly in the mist. Using our phones as flashlights, we ventured into the woods. The air smelled damp and earthy, but the silence was unnerving. No birds, no insects, nothing. Then came a sound, a rhythmic clicking, sharp and deliberate. It echoed around us, impossible to pinpoint. "Turn off the lights," Ron whispered urgently. We did, plunging ourselves into darkness. The clicking stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. Then came the scream, a primal, guttural cry that froze us in place. "Run," Ron hissed. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush. Behind us came the sound of pursuit, branches snapping, heavy footfalls. I fired a flare blindly, its red glow briefly illuminating figures cloaked in primitive garb, armed with crude weapons. The image seared into my mind drove us forward. We reached the boat and scrambled aboard as Lucas gunned the engine. The figures emerged at the shore, watching silently as we sped away into the mist. By the time we reached the marina at dawn, the fog had lifted, but the unease lingered. The water lapped gently against the boat, a familiar sound in an unfamiliar world. We didn't speak, each of us lost in the memory of that night and the realization that some mysteries are best left alone. For me, it seemed like an ordinary Saturday, or so I thought, as I relaxed in our cozy living room. The warm afternoon sun spilled lazily across the floor. Our home, nestled near a thick forest, always felt like a refuge from the nearby bustling city. My younger brothers, Ethan and Logan, were upstairs, immersed in their world of video games, their bursts of laughter and competitive shouts occasionally reaching me. Nathan, the oldest, was supposed to be keeping an eye on us, but he was more interested in chatting on the phone with his girlfriend. I'm Rachel, by the way. I was 13 at the time, with shoulder-length chestnut hair streaked with subtle honey highlights and dark brown eyes. Being the only girl among my siblings, I often found myself on my own. That day, I was dressed in a simple gray hoodie and black leggings, perfect for a laid-back weekend at home. As I scrolled through my phone, a sudden tapping noise on the glass door leading to the back deck made me glance up. I squinted through the glass but saw nothing. Assuming it was just the wind or maybe a bird, I dismissed it and went back to scrolling. But the sound came again, louder this time, almost deliberate. My curiosity stirred. I set my phone down and hesitated for a moment. The forest behind our house had always been a familiar playground, but something about that evening felt different. The setting sun painted long shadows across the yard, turning the once welcoming woods into something darker and more foreboding. Probably Logan trying to mess with me, I muttered, standing up. Normally, I wasn't easily scared, but with the house so quiet, save for the faint sounds of video games upstairs, I felt a strange unease. Nathan's muffled voice from his room wasn't much comfort either. As I approached the sliding door, my hand hovered uncertainly over the handle. The knocking had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I briefly thought about calling for Nathan, but my stubbornness and a hint of pride stopped me. I unlocked the door and slid it open just enough to peer outside. A cool breeze drifted in, carrying the fresh scent of earth and pine. I strained to listen, but apart from the rustle of leaves, there was nothing. "Hello," I called softly, hoping for no response. Silence answered me. Taking a cautious step onto the deck, the wood creaked under my feet, a sound that felt strangely unsettling in the quiet evening. My eyes scanned the tree-line, my pulse quickening. That's when I saw it. A figure partially hidden behind an old, twisted tree. It stood there, motionless, clad in a dark hoodie and faded jeans. It didn't seem like anyone I knew. For a fleeting moment, I thought it could be one of my brothers pulling a prank. But then the figure shifted, its movement unnaturally smooth and disjointed. The light was fading quickly, and I couldn't make out its face, only a shadowy void where it should have been. A shiver ran down my spine, and the woods suddenly felt far from safe. I wanted to shout for Nathan, to bolt back inside, but fear rooted me in place. The figure stepped forward, snapping me out of my paralysis. I stumbled back, sliding the door shut and locking it with shaking hands. My heart thundered as I backed away, keeping my eyes fixed on the spot where it had stood. But now it was gone. I sank into the couch, clutching my phone with trembling fingers. Every creak of the house and shifting shadow heightened my tension. Nathan's voice from upstairs seemed distant, almost surreal, and the usual background noise of video games had faded into silence. I told myself it was just a trick of the fading light, but the image of the figure lingered in my mind. Summoning what little courage I had left, I decided I needed to check again. "Don't be silly, Rachel," I whispered, trying to steel myself as I stood up. Ignoring the safety of the lit room, I edged toward the door once more. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, the sound louder than it should have been in the quiet. I slid the door open just a sliver and peered out into the twilight. The air felt colder now, sharp against my skin. Suddenly, the figure appeared again, stepping out from behind the tree. This time it was closer. My breath caught as I noticed the mask it wore, pure white, with a grotesque grin carved into it. Fear tightened around me. This wasn't a prank. This was something far more dangerous. Before I could react, the figure surged toward me with an unnatural speed. Panic overtook me and I turned to flee, but a hand grabbed my hair, yanking me back. A scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate. A deafening gunshot shattered the night, and the grip on me loosened. I stumbled forward, scrambling back into the house. Another gunshot rang out, followed by a pained cry. I turned to see Nathan standing on the deck, his face pale, a shotgun in his hands. "Are you okay?" he called, his voice strained. I nodded, too shaken to speak. Nathan stepped inside, locking the door behind him. His presence was a much-needed anchor in the chaos. "I heard you scream and grab Dad's gun," he explained, his tone both angry and relieved. The police arrived minutes later, their flashing lights cutting through the dark. Our parents came home soon after, wrapping me in comforting hugs. Over the next few months, we learned that the masked figure was caught and linked to several crimes. Even now, the memory sends chills through me. I can't help but wonder why he came to our house that evening, and what might have happened if Nathan hadn't been there to protect me. This story happened when I was 17, and even now it sends chills down my spine. Back then, I often went out on my bike, growing bored of cycling around the neighborhood. I decided to venture into the trails for something more exciting. A nearby forest called Greenstone Woods seemed like the perfect spot after some online research. Living only a short distance away, it promised a pleasant ride to get there. When I arrived, the place was serene, almost magical. For a woodland area in England, it was breathtaking. At the start of the trails, I noticed signs marked with different colors, seemingly indicating difficulty or length, though I wasn't sure of their exact meaning. I chose the blue-marked path first, which seemed manageable and fun. Once I got a feel for it, I decided to try a tougher trail. That's when things started to take a strange turn. As I rode deeper into the woods, I began to feel oddly detached, like the forest was consuming me. Everything around seemed larger and more distant, and I lost track of time. Despite being good at staying oriented, I realized I had no idea where I was. Eventually, I reached a fork in the path. One direction appeared to lead out, while the other delved deeper into the forest. Curious and drawn by a strange pull, I chose the latter. The trail I found was unsettling. It looked unsafe, with jagged terrain that made it impossible to even walk my bike. Against my better judgment, I pressed on briefly before deciding to turn back. For a few moments, I stood motionless, staring down the path, overwhelmed by a sense of being watched. The feeling was intense, almost as if dozens of unseen eyes were on me, though logically, it didn't make sense. Shaken, I started making my way back, pushing my bike uphill since I was too exhausted to ride. As I retraced my steps, the sense of disorientation returned. The path felt unnaturally stretched, as if the forest itself had shifted. That eerie sensation of being watched grew heavier, almost threatening. Despite it being a public area, I hadn't encountered another soul since entering the trails. The scene around me was unnerving. A narrow river flowed on my right, its banks lined with bushes and the occasional tree. To my left was a steep incline. As I walked, I suddenly heard faint crying ahead. Slowing my pace, I tried to see who was there. The sound came from behind a tree near the river, but I couldn't understand why someone would cross the stream just to cry there. Concerned, I moved closer to see if they needed help, especially since the woods had a reputation as a place where people sometimes came to end their lives. But as I approached, the crying stopped, and no one was there. Creeped out, I turned and began walking faster. Moments later, the crying started again, this time across the river. I didn't look back. Instead, I picked up my pace, feeling more uneasy with every step. The rustling of bushes nearby added to my panic, as if something was following me. I began jogging, then running, clutching my bike as the crying grew louder and more desperate. Suddenly, my bike became impossible to ride. The back tire was completely flat, though it had been perfectly fine earlier. Terrified, I had no choice but to run, dragging my bike along, desperate to escape. The crying stayed close, as if chasing me, growing more intense and unearthly. I was overwhelmed by fear, nearly on the verge of tears, praying to reach safety. After what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only a few minutes, I saw the parking area ahead. The crying began to fade, retreating back into the woods. Exhausted, I stumbled into the car park, pale and gasping for air. Onlookers stared at me like I'd gone mad. To my shock, my bike tire was completely fine again, as solid as it had been before the whole ordeal. Without hesitation, I jumped on my bike and pedaled away as fast as I could, vowing never to return. Since then, I've shared this experience with others, and none of them have dared to visit Greenstone Woods with me. What truly haunts me is how this encounter aligns with folklore from my heritage. In Irish legends, there's a spirit called the Banshee, said to appear near rivers or forests, crying to foretell death. Hearing her wail can mean that someone close to you, or even yourself, might soon pass away. Since that day in 2019, I've lost my aunt, 2 dear friends, and my dog. Feels like no coincidence. Greenstone Woods is infamous for eerie tales, and many unsettling stories about it can be found online. Some even claim to have seen historical figures like the spirit of an engineer who designed a nearby bridge. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, the place holds an undeniable sense of foreboding. I've had other strange experiences before, but nothing compares to what happened in those woods. There's a secluded pond just a short walk from my home in Fairfield, Vermont. I've been fishing there ever since I moved to the area. It's tucked far away from roads and homes, offering complete privacy, and most days, I'm the only one fishing there. I keep my canoe at the same spot near the pond whenever I'm not using it. Hauling it back and forth is too much of a hassle, so I lean it against a sturdy tree. The canoe is heavy enough to stay put, even in strong winds, and I keep it covered to keep animals from nesting inside. One warm evening in July, I had been out on the water for about an hour and had already caught a few bass, which I tossed into a cooler. The sun was setting, and the remaining light was fading behind the trees. I was just about to head back when I heard a noise at the far side of the pond. Turning to look, I saw someone standing at the edge, tipping a large container and pouring its contents into the water. At first, I thought it might be some kind of trash, and I felt anger bubble up inside me. I shouted, "Hey, what are you doing?" The figure froze, glanced my way, and then bolted into the woods, leaving the container to spill the rest of its liquid into the pond. Squinting to get a better look, I noticed the liquid looked dark, possibly red. It was hard to tell in the dim light, but it gave me an uneasy feeling. Disgusted and unnerved, I decided to paddle back to shore. Polluting the pond like that was not only disrespectful but potentially harmful to the environment. I intended to report it to the local environmental authorities. Once I reached the shore, I unloaded my gear and dragged the canoe out of the water. While covering it, I heard a single snap, a sound like someone stepping on a stick, not far from where I stood. I froze, debating whether to call out, but something in my gut told me to keep quiet. I finished up as quickly as I could, left the canoe on the ground instead of leaning it against the tree, grabbed my cooler and gear, and hurried back to the road leading to my house. Even though the walk was only a few minutes, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like I was being followed. Once home, I rushed inside, locked the door, something I usually don't do, and put my gear away. The fish went into the fridge, but I didn't have the energy to cook. Instead, I heated some leftovers. While the microwave hummed, a knock at my front door startled me. My heart raced as I realized someone had likely followed me home. It was late, and the knock felt deliberate, not random. The lights were on, and my car was in the driveway, so whoever it was knew I was home. Another knock came, louder this time. My skin crawled as I stood frozen in my kitchen. A moment later, a voice came from the window. "Hey, excuse me. I think you saw me earlier at the pond. I just want to explain. There was no way I was opening the door." His calm tone only made me more uneasy. I yelled back, "Go away, or I'm calling the police." The man's voice grew quieter but still insisted, "Please, just let me explain." Ignoring him, I locked every window, turned on the air conditioning, and called the non-emergency police line to report the incident. I also filed a report with the Environmental Protection Agency about the dumping at the pond. Though making those reports gave me a bit of relief, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Around 2 a.m., a loud crash from downstairs jolted me awake. Grabbing my pistol from the closet, I stood behind the dresser near my bedroom door, heart pounding. I heard slow, deliberate steps coming up the creaky stairs. My room was the closest to the staircase, and soon the doorknob turned. The door creaked open, revealing the silhouette of a man holding something small, likely a knife. I switched on my bedside lamp, leveled my gun, and shouted, "Get on the ground, now!" The man raised his hands, seemingly trying to calm me, but he took a step back and said, "I'm leaving." He bolted downstairs and out the front door before I could react. I called 911, and the police arrived soon after. They noted the broken living room window and took down my description of the man. Short, with a beard, glasses, and wearing dark clothes. I accompanied the officers to the pond to locate the barrel, but it was gone. The man must have come back for it. I spent the rest of the night on edge, sitting in the living room with my pistol nearby. My brothers came over in the morning to help fix the broken window. One of them stayed with me for a few nights until I felt more secure. I can't shake the feeling that the barrel contained something sinister. Maybe even human remains dissolved in chemicals. Why else would that man track me down and break into my house? My advice: if something doesn't feel right, trust your instincts. Opening the door that night could have ended much worse.